At 25, I begged Jackson not to kill my little dog. He agreed not to kill it but asked me to kneel and apologize to Mandy on its behalf. I knelt down, Mandy laughed, and Jackson smiled indulgently. By 26, I begged him to save my critically ill father. He slapped a check against my face, saying he'd save him as long as I disappeared. He advised me to die far away so as not to dirty his home. I took the check to the hospital and later knelt by my mother's grave, cutting my wrist with a blade. When I turned 27, I married a man who only had eyes for me, but Jackson showed up at our wedding with tears in his eyes, demanding I hand over my dog because it had startled Mandy. I held my trembling dog close, facing Jackson and a tearful Mandy. Snowy had left a dirty paw print on Mandy's pristine white dress after she scared him. As Mandy timidly tugged at Jackson's sleeve, she whispered, "It's not right to do this. She's still your wife after all." But his cold gaze only asked, "Alice, will you kneel?" With Snowy shivering in my arms, I knelt down, and Mandy and Jackson exchanged smiles. Late at night, I received a message from Mandy. The photo showed her emerald green silk slip dress entangled with Jackson's white shirt on the floor. Her delicate arm hung off the bed, still wrapped with the tie I had picked out as a Valentine's gift for him. Separated for 3 years, Jackson was still as commanding as ever. Mandy taunted me, "Alice, have you failed to satisfy him these past few years? 3 times in a row, Jackson has been exhausted. You're a pathetically inadequate wife. I hate your dog, and I'll make Jackson kill it. The dog is irritating, the owner even more so. Your family is going bankrupt. What more do you have over me?" She continued, refusing to leave. I turned off my phone expressionless, feeling a persistent stabbing pain on the left side of my chest, another unexplained ache brought on by Mandy's return. Clutching my side, I took 2 painkillers before drifting into a hazy sleep. As the pain subsided shortly after, a piercing scream startled me awake. I rushed downstairs to find Snowy covered in blood, limping and yelping as it ran out the front gate. I called out for Snowy, but it had vanished into the night. I sat outside alone as Jackson returned, unaware of Snowy's whereabouts. I prayed it had fled to survive. I refused when Jackson offered to replace Snowy, saying, "It's unnecessary." Mandy was distraught, plagued by nightmares, unable to rest with that dog in the house. Chuckling through tears, I dared to ask, "Jackson, am I still your wife?" His response cut deep, revealing harsh truths about our marriage. Standing up, suppressing the growing chest pain, I whispered, "Jackson, let's get a divorce." "Divorce?" Jackson scoffed, mocking my plea. With my father's debts and failing health, our family and company had no means to save him. I was left with no choice but to seek help from Jackson, my husband. But as I approached his home, Mandy in a bathrobe at the door, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I remembered the words the doctor said when I fainted in the hospital earlier. "Alice, you need to undergo surgery immediately to remove the lesion on your left side to save your life. I recommend you stay in the hospital. Do your family and husband know? Dennis, can you help me keep this a secret? I don't want my dad to know about my illness." "Okay, but you need to have the surgery soon, Alice. I will personally perform the operation." "Dennis, I don't want to have the surgery." "Alice. This is not the time to be stubborn." "Thank you, Dennis. If I can't make it, I want to leave peacefully." I raised my hand, clutching my painfully chest, pale-faced. "I'll wait for Jackson to come out." Mandy was about to say something when she heard the bathroom door behind her creak. She suddenly changed her expression, ran to Jackson, tearfully, "Jackson, Alice asked me to donate a kidney to her father to save his life. But then what about my life?" Before I could say anything, I received a heavy slap across my face. I was stunned by the slap. Blood started to flow from my nose and mouth, but I just stared blankly at Jackson in front of me. We grew up together, childhood friends. He and Mandy were lovers in college, but his family wouldn't accept her due to her poor background, and he held a deep grudge against me, thinking I had plotted to break him and Mandy up. Though we were supposed to marry due to our family's arrangement, and I had feelings for Jackson. But he believed I was scheming, sent flirtatious photos to Mandy before our wedding, which led to Mandy's breakdown and suicide. And now, he believed this ridiculous lie and slapped me right in the face. I looked at him, reminiscing the Jackson who used to carry me home when I fell, the teenage Jackson who stood up to bullies to protect me. Where did he go? Jackson, see it as a favor for the good times we've had and help my dad. Jackson looked at me and suddenly smiled. He took out a cigarette, wrote a check. All right, I'll save him, as long as you go die. Okay, I'll go die. I raised my hand, pressing my numb left chest. Jackson, rest assured, I'll die right away if it can save my dad. No, Alice, if you die, die far away from me and Mandy's family. Jackson, don't be so scary. If she really dies at our doorstep, that would be too ominous. Have you heard Mandy's words? Jackson threw the check at my face. Get lost, stop embarrassing yourself. I knelt down, picked up the check. Finally, I took one last look at Jackson, my husband, the man I secretly loved since childhood. I bid him farewell in my heart. At 2 a.m, I sat in front of my mother's tombstone for a long time. Eventually, I curled up against the picture of my mother, and with a sharp blade, slit my wrist. Hot blood gushed out, soaking the damp soil beneath me. My consciousness began to blur, shivering from blood loss. I clenched myself tightly, and as my vision faded, a familiar yet unfamiliar figure ran towards me. I fell into a warm embrace but felt distant. I wanted to see who it was, but I had lost all my strength. The blood-stained arm dropped from the embrace, and I heard the man shout my name with all his heart. Alice, Alice. Someone actually cared about me. I was in a coma for a week. When I woke up, my father had been buried alongside my mother. No one knew that I had left a small piece of myself at my mother's grave. Losing my family, there was nothing left for me in this world to hold on to. But I survived. Lucas saved me. Alice, I'm sorry I'm late. Lucas held my hand, his eyes bloodshot. He had been by my side, looking exhausted with a scruffy appearance. Lucas, why are you here? I weakly asked, trying to muster a smile, but even that was beyond me. Stop talking, Alice. Rest well, let me know if you want anything to eat. I want to see Jackson. Alice. Lucas' eyes held restrained anger and helplessness, but eventually, he didn't refuse me. I slept for a few hours before Jackson finally showed up, with Mandy in tow. But he didn't let Mandy into the ward. Lucas said you were looking for me? Jackson stood by my bed, surprisingly speaking in a gentle tone. I lay there, calmly looking at him. It was probably at the moment when my blood was about to run dry. My obsession and love for him vanished along with that fresh blood. But at that moment, I felt an unprecedented sense of ease and freedom. It was like I had personally cut the ropes binding me. Jackson, let's get a divorce. He looked surprised, but then nodded in resignation. It's for the best if you've come to terms with it. We shouldn't have gotten married in the first place. I smiled, then let's do it tomorrow, let's go get the divorce done. He showed a touch of mercy. You're badly hurt, just rest. I'll take care of the divorce procedures. Okay, thank you for that, I replied. Alice, if you want anything, just let me know. We were once husband and wife. I don't want anything. Whatever I brought into the marriage, I can take back. Those were dowries prepared by my parents, so I don't want those things to stay in your house, I explained. Fine, I'll give you an additional $5 million. No need, my father left me a house and inheritance. Alright, suit yourself. Jackson suddenly sounded a bit irritated. He glanced at me several times. Alice, your father's situation isn't all my fault. He didn't want to undergo surgery himself. Of course, I know. My dad told me everything. I didn't want things to turn out this way either. If you hadn't schemed with Mandy and tried so hard to marry me, I wouldn't have hated you like that. I'm sorry, I won't bother you again in the future. Rest well, I'll come to see you another day. Jackson turned and left the ward. I slowly closed my eyes, feeling relief washing over me. The suffocating pain was gone, as if I had broken free from a tightly sealed cocoon. Later, Lucas reviewed all my medical records and test reports. Against my objections, he insisted on taking me to Germany for treatment. After much thought, I made one request: not to disclose my illness. If I ever needed surgery in the future, I didn't want people to know I was a flawed woman. Lucas trembled as he gently embraced me. "All right, it won't be revealed, no one will know." After receiving the divorce certificate, Lucas took me to Germany. On the day we departed, I heard that Jackson was going to get engaged to Mandy. Jackson's family didn't like me, the destitute daughter-in-law, but they disliked Mandy, who came from a very poor background, even more. They were vehemently against it. I had no interest in their affairs. After boarding the plane, I turned off my phone and broke the SIM card. I wouldn't use the old contact methods again. Everything here was left behind completely. In Germany, I soon started treatment in the hospital. Perhaps because my mood was no longer as depressed and heavy as before, my condition gradually stabilized. Lucas stayed by my side, despite being busy with the newly established company and having to take care of everything. I wasn't the naive and carefree child I used to be. I could feel that Lucas's feelings towards me were extraordinary. The overlooked details from before were now emerging one by one. The night before my wedding with Jackson, why did Lucas get so drunk? After my marriage to Jackson, Lucas went abroad and rarely returned over the past 3 years. He didn't even come home for New Year. When I visited Lucas's parents, the two elderly people held my hand and sighed as if they wanted to say something but held back. My father fell seriously ill, so why did Lucas appear so timely the night I had an accident? When I was a child, I liked to cling to Jackson because we were close in age and he loved to play, but Lucas always had an old and mature demeanor, completely unlike other kids. My parents often used him to teach me a lesson, so I stopped liking him, eventually growing distant. Later, as I grew older, I naturally fell for Jackson. But Jackson only had eyes for the delicate and weak Mandy. I didn't know how many times I secretly cried back then. One time, I was crying and writing Jackson's name on the ground when Lucas caught me. I was terrified. His face was especially cold and unpleasant. I feared he would tell my parents, begging him incessantly. Of course, he didn't tell my parents. Instead, surprisingly, he bought me an ice cream to cheer me up. He ate ice cream with me and listened to me babble about how much I liked Jackson. That night, he hardly said a word. He just coldly instructed me when he dropped me home, "Your upcoming college entrance exam is the most important, don't put your mind where it shouldn't be." Hastily nodded, but deep down, I didn't believe it. Such a boring person like Lucas wouldn't understand what it's like to like someone. I only realized it now. Lucas wasn't the one who didn't understand, it was me. In the second month in Germany, I suddenly received a call from a former friend, or rather, a mutual friend of Jackson and me. "Alice, where are you now?" "Out of town. Is something wrong? Can you go back to see Jackson, or at least give Jackson a call?" Even after just 2 months, hearing Jackson's name, I felt no ripples in my heart. "Sorry, Dennis, but Jackson and I are already divorced." "I know, but, Alice, Jackson isn't doing well now. Last night, he got drunk at our gathering and kept calling your name." I didn't say anything, I just hung up the phone and proceeded to block their number. They were Jackson's friends first, then mine. No matter what Jackson does, they will always stand by his side first. But they never thought about how Jackson is doing now. What relationship does it have with me, his ex-wife? In the afternoon, another unfamiliar call came in. I didn't answer. A moment later, I received a text message. "Alice, it's me, Jackson, can you pick up the phone?" I didn't reply, and I also blocked that number. Jackson is a very arrogant and self-centered person. I had been chasing after him for years, obsessed with him to the point of losing myself. But now, never again. Once you break free from the shackles of your cage, you realize how vast the world is. The so-called love that once made you desperate is nothing but trivial. Moreover, that so-called love may be more of a youthful obsession. His attitude is clear, he should not come looking for me again. But I didn't expect that 3 days later, Jackson suddenly appeared downstairs in the apartment building rented by Lucas for me. When I returned from the garden, I saw his lonely figure. "Alice." When Jackson saw me, his eyes lit up. I didn't approach him, but I didn't walk away either. My body was a little weak, and I didn't have the energy to fuss around. Jackson hurried over to me, reaching out to hug me. I dodged. Jackson paused. Alice, I've been looking for you. He looked a bit aggrieved. I remembered how back then, he changed girlfriends, went all out for Mandy. I was so angry, so heartbroken, I didn't want to deal with him anymore. He looked at me with the same expression. I always forgave him, continued to revolve around him. But now, he is still the same person, yet my heart no longer ripples. Do you need something, Jackson? I've been thinking about you all these days. Jackson looked thin, looking very haggard. Dennis said he wasn't doing well, and it didn't seem like a lie. I stayed silent, with no emotional response. I thought, how foolish was I to fall for such a fickle man when we were young. Jackson could never let go of any woman who left him. Mandy in the past. Alice now. Maybe it's the same, leaving only an indelible mark in memory. Jackson, is there something you need? If there isn't, I'd like to go upstairs. Alice. Jackson tried to grab me, but I dodged once again. Alice, Mandy and I are not engaged. Jackson, seeing me still silent, sounded a bit desperate. I agreed to the divorce in the heat of the moment. Alice, come back with me. I'll treat you well. You have no family left, we grew up together, I will be your only family from now on. He said urgently, sounding somewhat sincere. I found it utterly boring. Jackson, I won't go back with you. When I decided to divorce you, I completely let you go, I no longer like you. Leave and don't come back. Alice, you've changed. You would never do this before. You promised me to always be with me, always love me. Yes, I did promise, but I broke it. I didn't want to talk to him anymore, walked past him to go upstairs. Alice. Jackson reached out to grab me. Already suffering from a serious illness, his sudden tug made me dizzy, and I collapsed on the ground. What's wrong, Alice? Jackson seemed shocked, his face turning pale. It's nothing, just a bit tired these days. I pushed him away, trying to get up, but I had no strength. I'll carry you. Jackson bent over to pick me up, but suddenly got pushed away. Lucas? Jackson stood up unsteadily, looking a bit annoyed. What are you doing here? Ignoring him, Lucas lifted me up. Alice, let's go home. Lucas. Put Alice down. Alice doesn't want to see you, so leave quickly. Who do you think you are? Alice is my wife, she wouldn't not want to see me. If I remember correctly, you were the one who finalized the divorce proceedings. Looking at him coldly, Lucas said, Jackson, don't forget, you were the one who gave up on Alice. Please don't harass her anymore, if you show up here again, I will call the police. Lucas, you like Alice, you've always liked her, so now that we've just gotten divorced, you're taking advantage of the situation, aren't you? I admit I like Alice, but taking advantage is not something I would do, Jackson. Jackson, don't think all men in this world are as despicable as you. Lucas, let Alice choose for herself, whether to go with me or not. Jackson wouldn't give up. Alice, come back with me. We are still husband and wife, let's live a good life together. We can get another dog, named Snowy. His eyes red, Jackson urgently pleaded, Alice, you've always wanted a child, we can prepare when we go back, boy or girl, whatever you like, as long as you like me, okay? I won't see Mandy again in the future, okay? Lucas held me, his face as composed and calm as ever. Alice, it's your choice, I respect all your decisions. It seemed like it had always been like this from childhood to adulthood, never showing emotions, but I remembered that night, when he found me at my father's grave, how heart-wrenching his voice calling my name was. How scalding his tears fell on my face. In that moment, my heart twitched ever so slightly. The pain, starting from the depths of my heart, spreading through my limbs, that sour, uncontrollable ache, made my eyes turn red in an instant. Lucas probably didn't realize it himself. His tone was calm, but how tightly he held my hand. And there was a slight trembling. He must be scared that if Jackson beckons, I'll run back to him. Scared that Alice, still as naive and foolish, will be blinded as before. I lightly held Lucas's slender fingers. Lucas. I'm a bit hungry. Will you cook for me? Lucas looked at me, then smiled softly after a few seconds. How about we go back home? As he held me walking into the elevator, it seemed that Jackson still couldn't believe my choice. But he was too proud to chase after us. Lucas made me sit on the couch to rest, then went to the kitchen after taking off his suit jacket. While simmering the soup, he brought me a cup of honey water. Holding the cup, I watched his busy figure. This daily life felt like true happiness. How nice it would be if I weren't sick. Alice, it's time for dinner, Lucas said as he escorted me to the dining room. All the dishes I loved were there, even a dessert, a small scoop of ice cream. Can you eat this? I have many dietary restrictions now. It's been a while since I had ice cream. Do you remember when you used to love it so much when you were younger? Just have a little. Lucas, you work so hard, isn't it tiring? Lucas just patted my head. Alice, I've never been this happy before. If only I weren't sick. You'll get better, no matter what, I'll cure you. But what if one day I'm truly broken? As long as you're Alice, that's enough. Lucas served me a bowl of soup. Eat well, Alice, I'm here. But Lucas wasn't a god. People get sick eventually. I've been unhappy for years, too stifled. That's why I got this illness. Though the condition stabilized temporarily before, it quickly relapsed. That night, I fainted while showering. Lucas didn't even change his shoes, just carried me to the hospital. I was rushed into the emergency room. He sat on a bench in the hallway, staring at the closed door motionlessly. Later, the doctor said I needed chemotherapy and, if necessary, they had to remove part of the affected area to prevent the cancer cells from spreading. I needed to shave my head, starting the excruciating process every cancer patient must endure. Lucas sat by my bed, his eyes so tender. Alice, even if we shave off all your hair, you'll still be the most beautiful girl. Will you let me accompany you through this? He took off his hat, now with his newly shaved head. All the repressed emotions, guilt, and regret suddenly overwhelmed me. I hugged him, crying gradually until I was like a child, losing composure in his arms. Lucas. Clutching his sleeve tightly, I sobbed, whispered, Lucas. Alice, listen, let's undergo treatment together, okay? Can you wait a little longer? I lifted my tear-soaked face in his embrace. Before my chemo, Lucas, can I be your bride? When I married Jackson, we just got a marriage certificate. No engagement ceremony, no wedding. And on our wedding night, there wasn't even a bridal chamber. Because Jackson flew abroad overnight to an attempting to console Mandy, who was threatening suicide. Hard for anyone to believe, even Dennis. Married to Jackson for 3 years, we never truly were husband and wife. It's quite ridiculous. He wouldn't give me a wedding, nor would he touch me. But in those 3 years, I deceived myself like a blind fool. Every girl has such a foolishly devoted phase. Some are lucky to wake up, some will deceive themselves for a lifetime. I died once, reborn like anew. I no longer wanted to consider worldly concerns, nor did I want to experience regrets and missed opportunities. But I didn't get a marriage certificate with Lucas. If I were to leave this world someday, Lucas had to continue living well. He would find another girl, marry, and have kids. I was a bit selfish, but couldn't be entirely selfish. Our wedding wasn't grand. On the day before the wedding, Lucas gave me a huge surprise. He found Snowy and brought it back to me. I was ecstatic, hugging Snowy and unwilling to let go. Snowy nestled in my arms, whimpering, still recognizing me. It missed me. In that moment, I truly felt like the happiest person in the world. I had no parents, the friends I had were mostly linked to Jackson. For my wedding to Lucas, I only invited my best friend Emily. We were high school classmates. I followed Jackson back to my hometown, as she pursued her crush southwards. I married Jackson without a wedding, and she couldn't be my bridesmaid. But this time, she could wear a pretty bridesmaid dress and accompany me down the aisle. Alice, why didn't you tell me? About your illness, about the divorce. Emily held me, crying for a long time. Aren't I your best friend? Didn't we promise no more secrets? You're living a happy life now, I didn't want you to worry about me. Emily hesitated for a moment, then her tears started to fall more fiercely. Alice, I'm not doing well at all, I'm not happy. What's wrong, Emily? You and Ken have always been good, haven't you? Emily shook her head. Forget about my problems, tell me about yourself, Alice. Things were pretty bad for me before, but now, I'm very happy. I looked at Lucas. The stylist was fixing his hair. He saw me looking at him through the mirror, and a fond smile crept into his eyes. I smiled back. Emily, look, I've prepared the most beautiful bridesmaid dress for you. Emily, with red eyes, touched the exquisite bridesmaid dress. It's really beautiful. You silly girl, why did you dress the bridesmaid so nicely? I leaned into her embrace, just like when we used to study together playfully. Because you and Emily are the best of friends, I just want my good friend to look beautiful. Yuri the bride, today you are the most beautiful, no woman in the world can compare to you. Emily pinched my cheek. Quick, touch up your makeup, the wedding will start soon. I obediently went to touch up my makeup, everything was ready. Changed into high heels, Emily helped me up. I smiled and looked at Lucas. Lucas, do I look good? I still had thick black hair. I was wearing a bride's white gown, with slightly heavier bridal makeup. I looked healthy and beautiful. Lucas looked at me very seriously, carefully examining his bride. Very beautiful, hairstyle, makeup, all suit you very well. You look handsome too. I raised my hand and lightly touched his freshly trimmed temple. Lucas, you are the most handsome groom in the world. He chuckled, gently hugged me, afraid of messing up my makeup. He pecked me like a dragonfly. Alice, in my heart, you are the most beautiful girl in the world. He held my hand and we walked out. None of us expected that Jackson would appear in the hall downstairs. He was even wearing a very formal black suit, holding a bunch of roses. Lucas's relatives looked surprised. Lucas's parents' faces also looked grim. Jackson paid no attention. Holding the bouquet, he walked straight to me and Lucas. Lucas's expression gradually turned cold. Jackson, today is a good day for me and Alice. I don't want to make things awkward. Please leave on your own. Jackson ignored him and just gazed at me with bright eyes. He was much thinner, with shorter hair. I saw that he was wearing a white shirt inside his suit, somewhat familiar. The tie clip was also familiar. Even on his ring finger, he still wore the wedding ring we bought randomly. Alice, please come back. Jackson was on one knee with the flowers in his hand. I am here to marry you, Alice. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. It used to be a dream of mine when I was young. But unfortunately, I didn't want to, and wouldn't dream that dream anymore. Some people are just not worth it. Lucas, isn't our wedding about to start? I asked Lucas softly. My wedding dress had a beautiful long train. Emily said I looked like a beloved little princess in a wedding dress. When I married Jackson back then, there was no wedding or ceremony. I cried secretly for a long time. Those times, I couldn't stand seeing others getting married, couldn't stand seeing brides in wedding dresses. My heart ached as if it was being cut by a knife, the pain was unbearable. But now, I could also be held in someone's hand. Jackson, please get up, Alice is about to get married, you need to let go too. Dennis urged softly. But Jackson still wouldn't get up. His eyes were red, staring blankly at my back in the wedding dress. In the end, tears streamed down his face uncontrollably. Alice is my wife, Dennis, don't you all remember? Alice is my wife, we've been married for 3 years. But Jackson, you've been divorced for a year. It was you who agreed to the divorce, you broke Alice's heart. I really didn't know. I misunderstood Alice, I was deceived, Dennis, I didn't mean to hurt Alice. We grew up together. I knew she always liked me. I thought she would always like me. I thought no matter what I did, she would never leave me. Jackson stood up in a daze, about to go after me. I want to find my Alice back. I regret it, Dennis, I regret it. I don't want anything, I just want Alice. Dennis and a few friends stopped him. Jackson, do you want to hear the truth? We knew you before we knew Alice, and we should have been on your side originally, but Jackson, I've really endured it for a long time. Have you ever treated Alice like a human, as your wife? What kind of person is Alice? We outsiders can all see clearly, why don't you believe her? Jackson, Alice has a heart too, she's been so pitiful by your side these past 3 years, we all want her to be a bit happier, you can see, she's about to get married. Lucas loves her very much, cares for her very much, she will be very happy in the future. Please don't entangle her anymore, okay? Dennis, Alice is just deliberately messing with me, she's too sad, that's why she deliberately wants to marry someone to provoke me. She doesn't like Lucas, the person she likes is me. Jackson tightly grabbed Dennis' sleeve, as if eager to prove something. You all know, Dennis, how much Alice has loved me over the years, right? You've all seen it, haven't you? We've all seen it, that's why we feel so cold about it. Jackson seemed to not hear, just continued on. It's like this, it must be like this, Alice is just too heartbroken, the person she loves is me, can only be me. Dennis shook his head. Jackson, are you crazy? My wedding to Lucas was very brief. He was worried about me, afraid I couldn't handle it, so he tried to shorten the ceremony as much as possible. Despite that, towards the end, I was in so much pain that I couldn't stand. Lucas carried me back to the room. Let me have some painkillers. Lucas' eyes were moist, he held me for a while before softly responding, you can only have one. By the evening, I felt much better. Lucas didn't go to have dinner with the guests, he stayed in the room with me. I wanted to take a bath. Alright, I'll carry you. Lucas carried me to the bathroom. After the bath, he placed me on the bed. Alice, rest for a while, I'll go get you something to eat. But I gently held his hand. Don't go, I don't want to eat, I want you to stay with me for a while. Come up here, hold me. Okay, whatever I said, Lucas agreed, he was so obedient and gentle towards me. Nestled in his arms, I felt so happy, so safe. We talked a lot, discussing things from our childhood. Alice. Lucas didn't like showing emotions, even when expressing his love to me, he restrained himself. But at that moment, he lightly touched my forehead, let out a sigh. Do you know how jealous I was of Jackson all those years? When you married him, how sad I was, do you know? During those years, hearing that you were not doing well, many times I wanted to go back and take you away. But always lacked the courage, I regretted a lot, Alice, if only I had gone back to find you earlier. I lifted my head, gently kissed him. It's okay, Lucas, at least now, we are together. You're right, at least now, I am with you. When Lucas kissed me, his actions were very light, almost as if he feared that using a little force would hurt me. I asked him to turn off the lights. Some secrets can only be quietly shared in the darkness. Lucas, do you want me? Alice? At least before I leave this world, let me have no regrets, okay? After saying that, for the first time, I saw such a naive expression on the usually composed and steady Lucas. He seemed to turn into a passionate and confused young man. Somewhat incredulous, yet at a loss, he looked at me. Alice. I couldn't help but smile, raised my hand to his neck. Lucas, now I am your wife. In this world, there are many people who can easily be in love with someone. They can easily engage in a relationship and then abandon it as a worn-out shoe. But in this world, there is also a type of person who remains pure, never flippant in relationships. Lucas said, he fell in love with a flower silently when he was very young. He watched as the flower blossomed for someone else, withered, cried, and laughed. His emotions fluctuated with the flower. He used to think that as long as the flower bloomed brilliantly and warmly, he didn't care about anything else. But when later, the flower was about to wither and die, he couldn't hold back anymore, and went back to her, transplanted the flower by his side. From then on, for the rest of his life, he would carefully nurture her. We were husband and wife for 5 years. When I got very ill later, the doctor said, both of my breasts needed to be removed. That way, I might live 2 more years. I didn't agree. I didn't want to die in front of Lucas in such a disfigured and ugly way. I didn't want Lucas to be sad. There are too many farewells and separations in this world. I have experienced many, I know how painful they are. The day I left Germany, it was snowing heavily. The feeling of leaving Lucas was completely different from when I left Jackson in the past. It was unbearable, so reluctant, it felt like my heart had been ripped out, leaving me empty inside. A few days ago Dennis called me. He said Jackson's situation was very bad. When I got married years ago, he and Mandy broke up for good. But 2 years ago, Mandy came back with a 3-year-old child. She directly handed Jackson a paternity test, saying the child was his. Jackson's family didn't believe it at first, they did a paternity test. It turned out to be Jackson's child. Because of his grandson, Jackson's parents eventually compromised. But Jackson refused. He only acknowledged the child, refusing to marry Mandy. Naturally, Mandy couldn't swallow this, and they had a tumultuous 2 years. Until recently, Mandy completely broke down, revealing all the past secrets, then, once again, disappeared. It turns out, everything Jackson had against me, was all fabricated and calculated by Mandy. I've never sent any intimate photos to Mandy to provoke her. Mandy faking suicides were all her own designs, just to get Jackson back. From start to finish, Alice, was the most innocent one. Dennis said, Jackson was almost going crazy back then. Later, he just became more and more unwell. He stopped going to work, stopped caring for his child. Day and night, he just sat with his dog named Snowy, muttering that he was waiting for me to come back. Dennis tried to ask me if I wanted to go back and persuade Jackson. Dennis, I'm going to die, I can't control anyone anymore, but you can relay a message to Jackson. What message? Alice died at the age of 26 in front of her father's grave. But the Alice who survived afterwards belonged to Lucas, her heart also belonged to Lucas. You made him forget Alice, forget the past, and look forward. After a while, Dennis asked me. Alice, will you forgive Jackson, will you go back to him? Sorry, my dad said before he died, he didn't want me to be with Jackson again. Dennis hung up the phone and never called again. But a month later, I received an obituary on my phone. Jackson killed himself. He slashed his wrist. The day he died was the day I married him that year. I didn't go to Jackson's funeral. But in my heart, I completely let go of the past, maybe not forgiveness, just letting go. On New Year's Eve, I snuck back to see my parents late at night. I stayed by their graves for a long time, until finally, the pain was almost unbearable. In a daze, it felt like someone lifted me up. Alice, we're going home. I felt like I was back in my youth. The first time I saw Lucas, he was like a tall poplar tree. Wearing a blue and white uniform, carrying a backpack, quiet yet steady. I was still a lively little girl, running around like the wind. His parents smiled and asked him to call me sister. Are you Lucas? I looked at him curiously, thinking he was quite handsome. Yes, he nodded reservedly. I immediately opened my dirty little hand and handed him candy. Eat candy. Lucas hesitated for a moment but took the almost melting candy. Let's go out to play, I held his sticky hand. He didn't let go of my hand. So hand in hand, we ran to the riverside. Some kids were playing house. Someone played the bride, and I was immediately envious. I want to be the bride, will you be the groom? Okay. We clumsily imitated the other children's wedding ceremony. Lucas, when we grow up, will you buy me a wedding dress? Yes. It should be very beautiful, with a long, long train of white veil. Okay. You're so good to me, when I grow up, I want to marry you. Alice. Little Lucas touched my hair. He looked cute and handsome when he smiled. No breaking promises, I nestled in Lucas's arms, using my last bit of energy to tell him. Lucas, Alice doesn't break promises. Hot tears fell on him as he hurriedly took off his coat, tightly wrapping me, holding my hands, rubbing them incessantly. Alice, hang on a bit longer, let's go to the hospital. Take me home, I don't want to go to the hospital. Okay. Lucas, like when we were kids, carry me home, okay? Lucas couldn't help but start crying. He knelt down, let me lie on his back, and he was going to carry me home. Alice, hold on tight. Lucas stood up, I lay on his broad back, and the last tears slowly soaked into his clothes. But the road home is too long, Lucas. Next life, can you appear earlier, please? In the next life, let's fall in love from the moment we meet.